3 years after the Brexit referendum, Britain is divided and deadlocked. Forced to resign as Tory leader, Theresa May's torrid time as Prime Minister is nearly over. But who is the man, and they are all men, to take over? Who can sort out the Brexit shambles and lift the Conservative Party from its pitiful 9% at the European election? Beyond Brexit, do they have any big ideas? Which burning injustices keep them awake at night? How will they fight off the challenge from Nigel Farage, Jeremy Corbyn and the other parties? Tonight, in the first live TV debate, we'll spend 90 minutes finding out. This is the only time in the knockout stage of the contest in which the candidates will be questioned face-to-face by a live studio audience. It's made up of floating voters. All of them say they are at least open to the idea of voting Conservative. So if the contenders can't get these people on side, they can forget any prospect of a prolonged stay in Downing Street. So let's meet the men who think they can do a better job than Theresa May. In alphabetical order, across the stage, Michael Gove from Aberdeen went to the private Robert Gordon's College on a scholarship before Oxford University and became a journalist. Jeremy Hunt from Surrey went to Charterhouse Boarding School and Oxford. He co-founded a business before going into politics. SAJID JAVID went to Downend State School in Bristol before Exeter University and became a banker. DOMINIC from Buckinghamshire went to Dr. Challoner's State Grammar School and Oxford before becoming a lawyer. And Rory Stewart went to Eton and Oxford before working as a diplomat and founding a charity in Afghanistan. Now, you probably noticed that one of our lecterns stands empty, and that's because Boris Johnson has declined to take part in this debate. But the invitation still stands. Mr. Johnson is welcome to take his place at any point in tonight's programme. But we are delighted to have the other 5 candidates with us for a free and fair debate. Our format is simple. The audience asks the questions, I will follow up and clarify where appropriate. Each candidate will get to answer a question first, and at the end of the programme, each of them will make a short closing statement. Our first question is from Desi Latimer from Stroud in Gloucestershire.
How do you intend to win against FARAGE and CORBYN?
Michael Gove.
Desi, there's nothing more important than preventing Jeremy Corbyn getting into Downing Street. I had the opportunity earlier this year in Parliament to close a debate, and that was at a moment when the Conservative Party was at its lowest ebb. And in those 10 minutes, I was able to take Corbyn comprehensively to pieces. And that's what we need in a leader, someone who has strong beliefs in Conservative principles, someone who can argue for them against someone who, if they were in Downing Street, would ruin our country with his Marxist economics and with his inability to look after our security. And when it comes to Nigel Farage, there is one thing that we need to do to beat Nigel Farage, and that is to deliver Brexit. I argued for Brexit right from the beginning. I led the Leave campaign. I will deliver Brexit and see an end to the threat from Farage and keep Corbyn out of Downing Street.
Rory Stewart.
So in order to defeat Nigel Farage and Jeremy Corbyn, you've got to do 2 things. Firstly, you've got to deliver Brexit. You've got to deliver Brexit in a way that is efficient, that works for our economy and is above all quick. In order to defeat Jeremy Corbyn, we have to reach out to Labour areas. I've been very proud recently to be in Labour safe seats like Poplar. And I've learnt from Jeremy Corbyn. I've learnt from the way that he listens to people, but I've also learnt that people don't want to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. There is a huge yearning for the centre ground of British politics. What they're looking for is somebody who's going to invest in public services, who takes the safety on their streets seriously, but somebody who's also responsible about our economy, who understands we need a habitat for businesses to thrive, and who above all understands that action comes from realism.
Dominic Raab, why can you achieve what Theresa May hasn't?
I think the key issue in this leadership contest is one of trust. And we've not yet kept our promises on Brexit. And we can't get on and talk about all those other things, schools, hospitals, the aspirational society, fairer pay for workers, unless we keep our promises on Brexit. And I believe that I'm the candidate most trusted to get us out of the EU by the end of October. And then we can move on from Brexit and deal with all of those other issues, cutting taxes for the lowest paid in work, boosting degree apprenticeships and all those other things that Jeremy Corbyn can't do, only the Conservatives can do.
SAJID JAVID.
Well, thank you for the question. I think it's really about, as you said, how do we actually win the next election? Because that means defeating Farage and defeating Corbyn. And absolutely, we need to deliver Brexit. There's no question about that. It can't be delayed any longer. We have to have a credible plan, and I've set out my plan. But also, it's about much more than that. I think if we think delivering Brexit just means leaving the EU, we're kidding ourselves. Delivering Brexit is also trying to address what I think are a lot of the underlying frustrations and aspirations that went into that historic vote. And that means rebalancing our economy, dealing with the housing crisis, properly funding our public services, and so much more. And that's what we need to address. And if I may just add one more thing, we also, as well as having the right message, we need to have the right messenger, because the lesson that's been learned by the Conservatives over the last quarter of a century, we've won one general election in that period, and that was only just, and that lasted 2 years. We need to be a party that has broad appeal across the country, and that means having a messenger that can connect broadly with the whole electorate.
Jeremy Hunt, you're kind of saying the same thing. You need to deliver Brexit. You need to deliver public services. Why are you the man to do it?
Well, that's exactly the point, Chris, because Desi's question, the most important question of the evening, has come first. And when it comes to the Brexit Party, we are all saying the same thing. The only way to defeat the Brexit Party is to Brexit. But when it comes to defeating Jeremy Corbyn, that is about choosing a Prime Minister that families up and down this country trust with their future. And I joined the Conservative Party when I was 19 years old. My dreams then were to buy a house, save for a family, set up my own business. If Corbyn wins, he will destroy those dreams for all our children. And as Foreign Secretary, I see a man who supports Maduro, who's driven 3 million people out of Venezuela, who supports Putin when he has chemical weapons attacks. He is against aspiration.
All right, let's
he is
stay on your
against
stuff.
British values. He's against Britain, and he must never be allowed to run it.
But the question is, why can you all do what Theresa May can't? I mean, you've been in her team. If you've got the answer, why didn't you tell her how to do it?
Well, I think many of us, in fact, all of us, have sat around the cabinet table at different times and advised Theresa May what to do. She did extremely well in the last election to get 41% of the vote, but we didn't get a majority. And the lesson from that is very straightforward. We got the right-wing vote. We got the Brexit vote at that election. We will only get a majority if we reach out to the centre ground, to people who haven't voted Conservative before, young people, women, young families. Those are the people we need to talk about.
It's an issue of trust, Krish. And we have all sat round the cabinet table, but I'm afraid too many people have not been willing to keep our promises, accepting an extension, taking no deal off the table, willing to contemplate legislation that would have given way to a customs union or a second referendum. And that's why, having resigned as a matter of principle, because I'm absolutely clear in my mind, the number one thing we've got to do is keep our promises. I've got not just the resolve, but I can be trusted to deliver Brexit.
Well, I hope we're going to have an opportunity to debate Brexit in more detail, because the big question I'm going to have for Dom is how he's going to do it. But this isn't just about Brexit. Of course, we've got to deliver Brexit well, but it's about reunifying the country. It's about listening to people. It's about reaching out to people. It's going to meet them. And it's about winning their trust.
But I want to
win
concentrate on Brexit, because you're all saying you need to deliver Brexit. Now, they're all saying that they can open the withdrawal agreement. Do you agree with them?
No, I disagree. Everybody around this table has sat and gone through that 500-page document. One of us here left the cabinet table, but the rest of my colleagues, like me, have advocated for it, because we understand that we need a deal that controls immigration, that leaves the European Union, but has opportunities for the British economy in it. And my question for Dom, if I'm allowed, would be to say, how is he going to take us out? How is he going to leave, taking into account Parliament? Because it's really important that we live in a parliamentary democracy. There's been a lot of talk about suspending Parliament. The problem with that, which links to Corbyn, is what happens if Corbyn becomes Prime Minister and tries to suspend Parliament and take his stuff through? So my question to Dom is, how are you going to take no deal through against the consent of Parliament?
Well, Parliament has just recently voted not to take no deal off the table, but I had 6 years in the Foreign Office negotiating international deals. You're right, I was Brexit Secretary. And the one thing you never do in a negotiation is remove your ability to walk away. So we may all want different plans for Brexit, but it's for the birds. Unless you're clear that we're leaving come what may at the end of October, that's the only way we give ourselves a shot of a deal and the only way we keep our promises. And I'm the only candidate that can be trusted to deliver Brexit by the end of October.
How can you leave come what may, Michael Gove, if Parliament stops you?
Krishnan, you know that I believe in Brexit because I put everything on the line, friendships and family, in order to argue for it. But it's not enough just to believe in Brexit. You've also got to be able to deliver. And in government, in 3 big jobs, I've shown that you can deliver against sometimes impossible odds. In education, I ensured that we turned around our schools. In justice, I modernised our courts. At the Environment Department, I have shown how business and green groups can come together.
Let's stay on how you deliver Brexit.
And one other thing, Christian. We were asked earlier by Desi about Jeremy Corbyn. In order to deliver Brexit, you've got to beat Jeremy Corbyn. Ask yourself this. When Jeremy Corbyn wakes up on a Wednesday morning before Prime Minister's question time, who is the person he's going to be most terrified of facing? That's me.
Why are you pretending that you can definitely leave at the end of October? Parliament can stop you, can't it?
I think we can leave before then. Of course, we need to leave with the consent of Parliament. But the critical thing is that we can, I've shown in the past, that I can take jobs that others have thought were impossible and deliver. And also, people know that I began this. I led the Leave campaign. For me, it's personal because of what happened to my family and my father. So I am not going to stop fighting until we leave the European Union and take back control of our money, our laws and our borders.
SAJID, JAVID, is anybody here talking real sense? They're all pretending that it can happen. Parliament can stop it happening, that's the point. Parliament is
that's
dead.
not true, Chris.
Well, let me say this. You asked how are we going to deliver Brexit. I think one of the fundamental things to do is to learn from the mistakes that have already been made. The number one mistake that was made was not properly planning for no deal. Not because you want no deal. I don't want no deal. It's the last thing I want to see. But you cannot walk into a negotiating room and not have the opportunity to walk out without having signed the paper. I've done, you talked about my previous career at the start. I've done many multi-billion-dollar deals across the world with many sovereign states as well. And I've never walked in a room without the ability to walk out without signing. And that was the mistake. You do plan for no deal precisely because you want a deal. And we have to do that. And to take no deal off the table is a complete nonsense.
Jeremy Hunt, I mean, you said no deal is political suicide for the Conservatives.
No, I said...
So what's the point of keeping it on the table?
No, I said having a general election to force no deal through Parliament would be political suicide. I actually agree with everyone that we should, apart from RORY, that we should keep no deal on the table. But we've had a lot of discussion about how. We also need to think about who, because 4 people here are saying that we need to renegotiate a deal that will not go through Parliament. And to do that, to negotiate any deal, and I speak as someone who, if I become Prime Minister, will be the first Prime Minister to have been an entrepreneur. Negotiation is what I did every day of my working life. The first rule is that the other side have to have someone they trust to deliver a deal. Then after that, you've got to have someone who will play tough and drive a hard bargain. Let me finish, Krish. We have got to sit down and negotiate that deal. It's very, very difficult. But I say that it is fundamentally pessimistic if you say we can't do that, because that means we are giving this country the very stark choice of no deal or no Brexit. I'm
going to bring in another questioner because this will move us on to the next stage of this argument. Our next question is from Farah Omotosho from Buckhurst Hill in Essex.
What are your views on suspending Parliament? And if you don't suspend it, how will you deal with this current impasse?
Dominic Raab.
Well, we don't need to suspend Parliament. I think it's very unlikely because actually it's written in law we'll leave at the end of October. But every time one of these candidates, and they're great and they've all got merits and strengths, but every time one of them takes an option away from leaving at the end of October, whether it's because they're not willing to countenance no deal, whether it's because they flirt with another extension or a second referendum, we weaken our chances of getting the best deal. And we weaken our chances, we don't give ourselves the best shot in Brussels. Anyone that's negotiated in business, diplomacy, and my experience as Brexit Secretary shows that to be the case.
So just be clear, you are prepared to lock the doors of Parliament, shut Rory Stewart and everybody else out in order to get no deal on the end of October?
I never want to shut Rory out of Parliament. No, but what I've said is, look...
Are you prepared to do it?
I've said it, I don't think it's likely, but it's not illegal.
So you are prepared to do it?
No, what I'm saying is, this is the point, Chris, it's really important to understand. The minute we telegraph to the EU, and this is the fundamental mistake SAJID made, that we're not willing to walk away at the end of October, come what may, we lose the best shot of getting the deal. Stop taking things off the table and make sure that the only thing we're absolutely 110% committed to is keeping our promises to the voters of this country. This leadership contest is an issue of trust, and I'm the only one, I believe, who can be trusted to get us out by the end of October.
So this is very important. The reason why Dom is not prepared to take it off the table, why he would countenance something that is undemocratic, that is deeply disturbing, that would strike at the heart of our Constitution, is because he knows that there is no way of doing what he's talking about unless he actually suspends Parliament. He has to keep that option.
That's
and
nonsense,
this
Rory.
is and this is
the
the
Institute for Government has said very clearly a Prime Minister that is clear about doing it can do it. The most undemocratic thing to do would be to set up the Citizens' Assembly that Rory's talked about. That's the Venezuelan option.
Okay, so let me try to finish, please, Dom. I allowed you to finish. Please let me finish.
But don't misrepresent my position.
Okay, nor represent mine.
Well, you've talked about a Citizens' Assembly, haven't you? That is the Venezuelan option.
If I may.
Go on.
The Institute of Government report that Dom is quoting said, and this is very important, unless the Speaker was determined to work with the Constitution to stop no deal. The Speaker is quite clearly determined to do this. And the problem with all the other four is they think they're threatening something, but a threat is not credible unless it can be delivered. I too have negotiated. The European Union knows perfectly well that no deal would be damaging. They know perfectly well that no deal cannot get through Parliament, which is why the question is how. And the answer to that is suspending Parliament. And the reason why we shouldn't do that is we're Conservatives, we believe in our Constitution. The reason we shouldn't do that is that if we start doing it, Jeremy Corbyn is going to do it. And the big reason not to do it is that Tony Blair tried to do it in 2002 over the Iraq War, and Parliament simply chose to meet in Church House and the Prime Minister stepped down.
Jeremy Hunt, would you do it?
Because Parliament...
No.
Parliament is not a building. Parliament is our democratic representatives, and they will meet wherever they want to meet, regardless of what a Prime Minister tries to do in the Iraq War or today.
Jeremy Hunt.
Well, let me tell you, Farah, why shutting down Parliament to get a Brexit deal through would be a profound mistake. And it's quite simply this. We've got to ask ourselves why it is that we've got ourselves into the crisis that we're in at the moment. It is because the Conservative Party and our friends in the DUP have been unable to unite behind a Brexit deal. If your response to that lack of ability to unite is to say, well, in that case, if you don't agree with me, I'm just going to close down Parliament, despite the fact that the Brexit referendum was actually bringing back power to Parliament, it was bringing back sovereignty to this country. That is a fundamental misreading of what Parliament stands for and what the people in this country will accept. It's the wrong thing to do. I wouldn't do it, and I don't think most people in the Conservative Party would do it either.
SAJID, JAVID, would you do it?
Absolutely not. In fact, I have to completely disagree with Dom on this one. And it's worth thinking about. Dom says we must deliver Brexit because we have a referendum. We had a referendum, and it's absolutely clear it's our democratic duty. And he's right about that. We must deliver Brexit because it's our democratic duty. But you don't deliver on democracy by trashing democracy. We're not selecting a dictator of our country. We're selecting a prime minister of our country, one of the proudest parliamentary democracies in the world. I think to suggest that you would suspend Parliament and put an end to our sovereign democracy just to suit some goal that that hasn't really to implement democracy is just not right, and we can't do that.
So will you accept then?
Rich, I must just come in on that.
No, hang on. Let me just clarify this. Will you accept then that as Prime Minister, it would not be within your power to take the country out on no deal? It would be up to Parliament.
No, I accept that because of our Constitution, any Prime Minister of the day, especially one that's running a minority government, you have a certain set of powers that's set out in our Constitution. I would do everything in my power to take us out by October the 31st. It will be the clear policy of my government. But what I won't do is trash our democracy in the process.
OK. Everything in his power, he says. So the Prime Minister doesn't have the power to no deal, does he? That's the problem.
I think you're wrong, Christian. I think Farah's question was absolutely right, and it gets to the heart of this debate. 3 years after we voted to leave, we still haven't left. I feel that frustration every day, and I'm determined to deliver. But one of the reasons why I argued that we should leave the European Union is to make our Parliament stronger, to reinvigorate our democracy. I think it would be a terrible thing if, having said that we should have more power in this country and trust our institutions more, we did, as Dom seems to be implying, and shut the doors on Parliament. It is your Parliament. I will always stand up and fight for our democracy. We are answerable to you in the House of Commons, and we must defend our democracy.
So what happens when you don't get a deal, you're not allowed to no deal? What do you do?
Well, I think there are two types of defeatism. There's Dom's defeatism, which is, I won't be able to persuade Parliament, so I'm going to shut it down. And there's Rory's defeatism, which I can't get a better deal, so I'm going to ram the same deal through one more time. I believe, actually, and I've shown this in the past, that when faced with impossible odds, the right thing to do is to have a plan to deliver. And I believe that we can deliver an exit from the European Union that strengthens our democracy, that brings our United Kingdom together, and also allows us to have all the benefits of being a free trading country with reinvigorated institutions. And let's not forget, many of those who voted to leave the European Union were people who felt that their views had been overlooked and their voices hadn't been listened to.
Are you saying you can get Europe?
We believe, all of us five, that actually delivering Brexit is a way of reinvigorating our democracy. This is a great opportunity. And one of the problems that we've had in the past is that not everyone who's been seeking to deliver Brexit has believed in it. I've believed in it from the beginning, which is why I'm determined to deliver.
So,
Are you saying you can get the European Union to change the withdrawal agreement?
yes, he is.
I'm saying I can get the European Union to change their approach.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Are you saying that as well?
You cannot get the EU to budge unless you're willing to walk away. And I must just challenge your assumption that no deal is not something that the government could get through. A, because we had a vote last week which won to keep no deal on the table, and B, because the experts have shown, and Rory quoted the report, it is near impossible to stop a government that is serious. I'm not saying this because I want no deal. I'm saying it because I want to keep our promises. Give ourselves the best...
Dom,
just a sec,
must
Michael.
allow
Give ourselves
Parliament to
the
vote.
best shot
We cannot leave,
of the best deal.
We cannot leave
And
unless
Michael, I'm
Parliament
afraid
votes for it, Dom.
You would buckle because you've shown you would take another extension, you would take no deal off the table, you said that you would
I
accept
won't
legislation...
buckle. I will defend our democracy, Dom.
legislation
I will
on a
defend
second
our
referendum.
democracy.
When you do
and
all of
you
that,
cannot take Britain
you
out of the
rob
European
ourselves
Union
of
against
best
the will
chance
of Parliament.
of the best deal.
The fundamental issue here is that there's a competition of machismo. Everybody's saying, I'm tougher. Genuinely, every time I have this debate, everyone's like, trust me, I'm going to do it. I'm the guy. I can defeat the impossible odds. And I'm accused of being a defeatist by trying to be realistic about this. It reminds me of it. I was trying to cram a whole series of rubbish bins into the rubbish bin. And my wife said, you're never going to get these 3 huge bags of rubbish in. And I was tempted, like Michael and like Dom, to say, believe in the bin, believe in Britain, right? It's nonsense. They are not going to get a different deal out of Europe. We all know that. They know it themselves.
Just briefly, Sajid Javid.
Are you going
Let
to defend the
Sajid
same
Javid
deal
have...
the House of Commons that's been rejected 3 times already? Exactly the same.
Will you give me a chance to answer? Are
Yes.
you happy to let me answer? Thank you, Michael. OK, so the answer is we're not going to get a different deal from Europe. You and I and Jeremy and Sajid have argued for that deal because it's a 550-page document, works out in detail. You're not going to get any changes out of Europe, and your attempt to get changes out of Europe,
No changes at all.
Sajid Javid,
Dom's
Sajid
fury
Javid.
will leave you stuck, and my
I've got to
fury,
bring
actually,
Sajid
and
Javid
your
in.
fury
Right, come on.
will leave you stuck for months and years to come.
It's, first of all, Rory, it's not realistic because you've also been saying that you're going to call 50,000 people from a phone book and ask them to decide or something, something like that. That's not realistic either. It's not realistic. The only thing that is realistic and credible in terms of getting a deal is to focus on the one thing that's got through Parliament already, and that is the withdrawal agreement with a change to the backstop. That's it. Of course, it requires a change, but you go to Ireland. Ireland is the key decision maker on this. You've got to change something, and I've said we should offer to pay for all the costs of a new border, the so-called alternative arrangements, and that will change the mood music, and it's got the best chance of succeeding. All the other ideas that we're hearing about, they are pie in the sky. They are not going to work.
And our next question comes from Nick Lund from Worthing in West Sussex. Nick.
Hi. As the traditional party of business, how can you seriously contemplate a no-deal Brexit?
Jeremy Hunt.
Well, thank you, Christian. I just want to say something before I answer Nick's question, which is we've been talking about Brexit for 25 minutes now, and where is Boris? If his team won't allow him out to debate with 5 pretty friendly colleagues, how's he going to fare with 27 European countries? He should be here to answer that very question. Now, I have run a business for 14 years before I came into politics. I'm very aware that what businesses want more than anything else is stability. But business people also know that when you're negotiating, you have to keep all options on the table, which is why I've always said we should keep the option of no deal on the table. And if, when it comes to the 31st of October, the only way to Brexit is to leave without a deal, then I'm out, because we must deliver on our democratic promise to the British people that we will leave the European Union. But I would do so with a heavy heart, and I would not do so if there was a prospect of a deal around the corner. And I just say this, if we were nearly there with a deal, not quite there, but almost there, who on earth would contemplate actually ripping us out of the EU with all the disruption that would cause to businesses, the risks to the Union, particularly in Northern Ireland and in Scotland? That is not the way to close the divisions that have been caused by Brexit. We need a Brexit that works for the 52%.
But what would it mean for business?
And also for the 48% who are nervous about Brexit. I believe I'm the business person who can get that deal, negotiate that deal, and mean that we have some better choices on the table than we currently have.
Michael Gove, what would no-deal Brexit mean for businesses and farmers in Northern Ireland?
Well, a no deal is not what anyone wants. And of all the people putting themselves forward, I'm the minister with the most experience of preparing for it. So I know what it would involve. It would involve turbulence for our economy. But we're a great country, and we could get through it.
No, but
and
specifically, what would it
ultimately,
mean?
Krish, if there's a choice between no Brexit and no deal, I will always choose Brexit, because the Conservatives, yes, are the party of business and free markets and growth, but we're also the party of democracy. 17.4 million people gave us an instruction that we must leave the European Union. I believe that we can leave with a good deal, and I know the shape of that deal, one that protects farmers in Northern Ireland and also ensures that wealth is spread more equally across our whole country.
But Nick's asking you about no deal.
Nick is right. Nick is right.
So what
But-
would no deal mean for those farmers?
Well, Nick is absolutely right that no deal is not the best option. What the best option is securing a deal. And I am the candidate who can secure a deal, and I'm the candidate who can also ensure that we have a team together who will deliver the very best outcome for Britain.
What is this deal you're going to get? What's it going to look like? What are the tariff schedules going to be? When are you going to deliver it by? How long is it going to take?
We would only need to have new tariff schedules if there was no deal, Rory. As you know, if we have a deal with the European Union, then we can have no tariffs and no quotas and access to their markets. The critical thing is, what we can also do is change the backstop. As Saj pointed out earlier, the one thing that prevents us getting this deal through the House of Commons is the backstop. The European Union has been clear. The backstop has to be temporary. Well, what I would ensure is that we had a full stop to the backstop, a way out of it in order to ensure our United Kingdom came together and we left the European Union by honouring that
They've
mandate.
said no. They've said it, no.
Well, they would say that, wouldn't
over
they,
and
at
over
this
again.
point? They would
Why
say
would they
that.
say yes to you?
They would say that, wouldn't they, Krish? Because, of course, in any negotiation, both sides hang tough.
Do they
one of the
like you
things,
more than
One of the
Theresa May?
things, Krish, you're very good at interrupting. Now's the time to listen. The key thing about what I would do is I would show, as I have in every job that I've done in government, that faced with difficult odds, I can deliver. And we all know that the European Union, it's right, the European Union also don't want no deal. So we can secure a good deal that works in our interests. I've brought people together in every job I've done in government. I can bring our United Kingdom together. I can bring our European partners together to deliver the right deal for Britain.
I think now's the time to answer the question, actually. Why would they change their position for you when they didn't for Theresa May?
Because I have shown in government that my convictions will carry me through, and I also have shown in government that I can take on impossible odds. Remember, I was the person who argued that we should leave the European Union. At that time, commentators like you, Krish, with a generous heart were saying, you'll never win the referendum. But I won that referendum campaign against the odds. I'm used to people writing me off, and I'm used to being able to say at the end of the process, do you know what? With determination, with grip, with a belief in this country, and with a mastery of detail, we can deliver.
Dominic,
That's what I've done.
you are the most keen on no deal. Let's come back to no deal.
I'm not. I'm not. But the answer to your question, what will change the dynamic, and the answer to Nick's question is not that we want no deal or WTO Brexit, but that it's the best way to give us the best shot of a deal. And the worst thing right now is the paralysing uncertainty of going round and round. Rory will go back with the same deal again that's been rejected numerous times. We've got to end that uncertainty. And yes, there are some risks. I don't think they're as bad as Michael has suggested, but yes, there are some risks of a no-deal Brexit. But we can manage those risks and also grasp the opportunities. The EU itself says the growth market's the future for businesses from Latin America to Asia. That's also the way we can lower tariffs to cut the cost of living for consumers in our stores. So yes, we can manage the risks of a WTO, but more importantly, we can get on and grasp the opportunities. But I don't want no deal. I want to give ourselves the best shot of getting a deal. You can only do that in a negotiation if you're willing to walk away.
But will you level with Conservative Party business owners and business people and people who work in farms and retailers about what no deal means? What will it actually mean? Will it mean businesses going out of business?
I think, so the first thing I would do if I became Prime Minister is bring forward an early budget to telegraph very clearly to businesses that whether we get a deal or if we have to leave on WTO, we will apply the fiscal stimulus, the cutting of the taxes, to see them through. We need a bit of optimism about Brexit. We also need some can-do, but we must, a can-do spirit, but we must, above all, telegraph to the EU that come the end of October, we're leaving. That's the only way we'll change the dynamic in the negotiations.
But my family had a business. I worked in business also for 20 years before politics. And I do understand Nick's concern. And it is the case, of course, businesses want as much certainty as possible. But the reason that no deal exists as an option, it should remain an option, is precisely because you want a deal. We can't sort of wish no deal away. You know, for example, even if this Parliament, let's say, decided it was going to vote against no deal, the EU can do it to us. They can choose not to extend or something, even if Parliament wished it. So it can happen. So a responsible Prime Minister would prepare for no deal. And I think if we prepare properly, which we haven't done for 3 years, that it will actually bring on a deal, and that's the best way to end this uncertainty, to actually have that deal.
We'll come to you in a moment, Rory Stewart, but I have a question, and you can answer it first, perhaps. Sam Duffy from Dunstable.
As somebody who campaigned and voted for Leave, I'd like to know whether any of the candidates would be willing to use Nigel Farage to face off Brexit to take part in the EU negotiations.
Okay.
Rory Stewart.
Okay, well, I think, the only candidate here who's been up with Nigel Farage this morning on his LBC radio show. And I said to him very, very openly that I would love to engage with him to talk about these things because he represents the man who led that Leave campaign. He had a huge number of votes. He represents a lot of people in this country. So I'm very proud to talk to him, as I would be to talk to the trade unions. But
would he be on your team?
But Christian, let me, sorry, if I could do two things, please. Could I please answer the question? Because I was the one candidate who wasn't given a chance to talk about no-deal Brexit and then come back to Nigel Farage.
Well, you did, actually, because you...
No, I just said how. I asked the question how. But if I could please answer the question. Okay. I think a no-deal Brexit is a complete nonsense. And the reason why it's a complete nonsense is that at least all these three candidates have just explained that it would be deeply damaging to our economy. So how does it work in the negotiation to say, negotiate with me, because if you don't give me the deal I want, I'm going to do something which I've just told you is going to be deeply damaging to my economy? Let me finish for a second.
That's why we've got to stop doing down the British economy and the British country.
Okay, we're back to believe in the bin. I'm macho enough. I'm going to get the rubbish bin. It's not about belief, Dom.
You're the one that wants to create a citizens' assembly a la Nicolas Maduro.
Wait.
That's not championing democracy.
Dom, it's about realism, and it's about precision. I at least am explaining, unlike anyone else here, what the deal looks like. It's a 550-page document that defines zero tariff, zero quota access to the European markets. All this no-deal talk is undefined.
But it's been rejected 3 times, and you just want to keep banging your head on the wall.
But Dom, you're not telling us what your alternative is.
I have.
Okay, let me ask you a couple of questions.
Do.
What are the tariff levels on cheddar coming into this country under your deal?
Under my deal?
Yes, your no deal is apparently some form of deal.
No, I've
so
said
how
we'll
does
go
it work?
back with the House compromise, the only thing Parliament has accepted,
Okay.
and we'll give ourselves the best shot if they know we're willing to walk away.
Okay.
But what I
Let's not
wouldn't do-
descend into tariff rates.
Okay. So no,
But let's come back to the
Can I answer
question.
Sam's
Yes,
question?
let's come back to the question.
Wait.
Well, hang on, you've had a go at answering
I
that
just want to
question.
answer Sam's
Michael,
question.
go.
Right, okay. Yeah.
Nigel Farage is not the face of Brexit. 17.4 million people voted to leave. It's not all about one man, it's about all of us. And I believe the best way to deliver Brexit is to utilise the talents of everyone within the Conservative Party. I would utilise the talents of the team here and everyone in civil society in order to make sure that we could deliver it. Brexit is not about one politician's ego trip. It is about bringing this country together. And I believe I could be the captain of a team with great and diverse talents like Dom and Rory and Saj and Jeremy, and we could deliver for Britain.
Jeremy Hunt.
You and me both, Michael. We could all of us here want to be the captains of that team. But the very specific answer to Sam's question is because Nigel Farage stands for more than Brexit. Nigel Farage is very explicit. He wants a WTO Brexit. He wants to leave with no deal. And if you want to know why that should not be what we aim for, just look 2 rows behind you to Nick, who asked the earlier question, who is worried about the impact on businesses up and down the country. And the Conservative Party is the party of business. We are nothing if we don't champion the businesses up and down the country that create the wealth for the NHS, which I was privileged to run for many years. And we have to do everything we can to avoid that no-deal Brexit. In the end, if that's the only way to leave, then so be it. We should do so. But that should not be our first choice, and that is Farage's first choice.
Sajid Javid, so far Rory is the only person who says he would bring Nigel Farage into this. Would you?
Actually, can I just say, whoever becomes the captain amongst us, including this guy, whoever it is, we should all unite behind that person, because that's the only way we're going to get a deal. So we should be very, very clear on that. All unite behind that person. When it comes to Nigel Farage, look, I don't underestimate him as a politician. He's had great success in recent weeks, as we've seen. But delivering on something as important as Brexit should be the job of the elected government of the people. And as I see it, Nigel Farage today, at least, is not an elected representative in our parliament, certainly is nowhere near government. It should be the job of government, and that's through our sovereign parliament and whoever forms the government. Now, that is us right now. We have that task. We have to deliver on that task before we go back to the electorate with another general election, but it should be left to this government.
Dominic Raab, you kind of used your time interrupting Rory Stewart on this, but you need to answer the question on bringing in Nigel Farage.
Not onto our team. We keep our promises on Brexit. That's the way we deliver Brexit, and that's the way we put the Brexit Party out of business.
OK, so if I can take the time that was interrupted, just on that no-deal point. The problem with no deal is that big word no. It's a no to Europe, it's a no to trade, and it's actually a no to detail, because nobody's explaining what the tariff schedules are going to be. I believe in a country that says yes. Yes to trade, yes to a deal, yes to opportunity.
Jeremy Hunt?
Well, I've explained to Sam why I don't think Nigel Farage is the answer, but I would say on this I completely agree with Rory that the other consequences of no deal would be a very potentially catastrophic rift in our relations with our nearest neighbours for a very long time to come. And I think, as Conservatives, we have to also ask how we are going to bring the country together after the divisions of Brexit. And we need a Brexit that works not just for the 17.4 million who voted for it. We need a Brexit that works for the 48% of the country who are very worried about Brexit. And I think the answer to that is to show that 48% that the fundamental character, the fundamental decency of our country as a country that is optimistic, open, there for the rest of the world, internationally minded, that is not going to change. And we are going to be there, and we're going to make sure that we are that tolerant Britain. And that's another reason why Nigel Farage is not the answer.
But the point about Nigel Farage is that he poses an challenge to all of you if you don't deliver Brexit. You said, you know, an election before delivering Brexit would be a disaster, would be a suicide note for the Conservative Party. What if you remain locked?
Well,
I mean, why wouldn't the European Union say, Jeremy Hunt thinks if we just string this out until the next election, Labour will win, Brexit won't happen, let's just do nothing?
Because in the end, as I think 4 of the 5 people here this evening agree, if there is no prospect of a good deal, we should leave without one. But, as I think all of us agree, the only way to deal with the Brexit Party is to Brexit. And that's what we have to do.
You don't beat the Brexit Party by becoming the Brexit Party.
Our next question is from Matthew Hutchinson.
I'm Richard, actually.
Oh, I beg your pardon? Where's Matthew? Matthew's here. Come over here, right.
Thanks. With the country so divided and people abused for their political views, how will you reunite us aside from Brexit?
SAJID JAVID.
It's worth remembering, actually, today is the 3rd anniversary of the death of Jo Cox. And we all know why, sadly, she was murdered. And one of the things that she said so often was that we've got so much more in common as a country. And of course, she was so right. And sadly, especially in my role as Home Secretary, I see a lot of division in society. I see a lot of extremists. You know, I get attacked all the time because of my Muslim background by both Islamist extremists and far-right extremists. And I do feel today there's too much division in our society. We've talked a moment ago whether someone's Remain or they will leave, whether someone's black or white, north or south, urban or rural. And whatever happens, this is the #1 thing, I think, to address in our country today if we are staying together as a cohesive society. And I think it's incumbent on all politicians, especially when we see around the world, whether it's the US, it's Italy and others, you have politicians that want to feed off anger and feed off division, that we, as Conservatives, always look at the best in people and try to bring them together. And that's why I think it's important to have someone that can unite people. And my own background, my life experience is it's fair to say it's very different from a Conservative leaders of the past. I'm not from central casting, and I think that can make a difference, that if you have someone that is different, you have a different messenger that can help bring people together.
Dominic Raab.
I think we've got to show we're bigger than the sum of our parts as a country. We've got to get the country moving forward. We've got to show those people who feel left behind that we're on their side. And I think this is very tangible. People want to know not just the hot air from politicians, but what they'd actually do. So that's why I've set out that I would cut the taxes of the very lowest paid, raising national insurance to save a work on, say, £15,000, £20,000, £460 each year. I want them to know we're on their side. I want a fairer society, not just a fairer economy. So I would boost degree apprenticeships, all the opportunities of going to university, but none of the debt. We've got some cracking degree apprenticeships like Jaguar Land Rover with Warwick University. And I also think, crucially, we've got to make sure, when we're selling the Conservative dream, that every young person can share in it. So we've got to build the homes we need and make sure they're affordable. And if we do that, and we actually make sure people feel they've got a stake in our society, not only will we move the country forward, we'll get beyond Brexit and we'll have a fair economy, a fairer society, and I'm sure we'll then beat Jeremy Corbyn.
Jeremy Hunt.
Well, thank you, Matthew, for asking that question, because that actually is the fundamental cultural question that the Conservative Party is now choosing. Do we choose a leader? Do we choose a direction for our party that is about uniting the country or dividing it? And Saj spoke very movingly about healing the racial divisions. I want to talk about one other division, which I think needs to be talked about more often, and that is young people. They have been politicised and energised by the Brexit debate, but they look at our political parties and they say, we're not really sure that any of them are for us. And they worry about getting a good job, they worry about buying a house, they worry whether politicians take climate change seriously. And I think if we're going to unite the country, we have to think about uniting the generations. We have to show people that, yes, we care as well. If there's going to be a planet here in 50 years' time, that we recognise it is much, much harder these days to buy a house than it was when we were younger, that we care on the values that matter to younger people. And if I could say one thing, which is, I think, our national blind spot. 1/4 of primary school leavers are unable to read or write properly. We have 7 million adults who are functionally illiterate. We should be the Conservative government that abolishes illiteracy in our lifetimes, that says that every single person is going to leave the education system with a rigorous qualification that means that they can get a well-paid job.
I agree with Jeremy. Matthew, you pose the essential question that all of us have to face. Our country is more divided than it's been for many generations. Divided along the lines that Jeremy mentioned, generationally, also divided between people who voted Remain and Leave. And we need to come together. And instead of putting badges on people, instead of saying that you belong to this tribe or that group, we need to value people as individuals. One of the things I've always believed is that every individual has something to offer. There is a treasure in the heart of every man and woman. So when I was Education Secretary, I was determined not just to improve schools, but also to narrow the gap between rich and poor. And then when I was Justice Secretary, my view was that individuals, even if they'd made mistakes and found themselves in prison, had something to offer. And we should look beyond their past and do everything we could in order to make them part of one nation working together. And now I think the critical task for us is to remember that many of those who voted to leave the European Union came from families that had been overlooked and from communities that had been undervalued. I know, because of what happened to my father's business, what it's like to see a dream die. And I think that politicians that have been too distant from too many in this country need once again to be optimistic about this future, to value every individual, and to say to those undervalued communities and those overlooked families, you are at the heart of everything we will do. We're going to bring our country together to make it the best in the world once more.
Rory Stewart.
So the question of unifying our country is also a question about unifying and keeping together the United Kingdom, and I feel this very, very personally. I'm a Scot, I represent an English constituency right there on the English-Scottish border. And the greatest campaign I was involved in, before I was involved in standing to be the leader or the Prime Minister, was to try to keep the United Kingdom together. And one of the reasons that I am so much committed in everything I do to compromise, to the centre ground, one of the reasons why I absolutely want to reject this push for no-deal Brexit, and I absolutely want to reject the politics of Corbyn, is I think the energy in this country is in the centre ground. The energy of this country is with pragmatism. It's with compromise. I'm not ashamed of the fact that Lib Dem and Labour voters say that they would vote for me. I think that's something to be proud of, and I think we need to work to listen to each other and, above all, to bring this country together.
Let me just... Let me just very briefly follow up. Sajid, Javid, when it comes to uniting this country, how sure are you that Britain is ready for a British-Pakistani Prime Minister?
I know what it's like to walk into a room and be an outsider. I've lived with prejudice through much of my life, especially as a child. But as I've grown up and in my adult years, I think we have become the most successful multiracial democracy in the world. And today you can find people of all backgrounds, of all minorities and religions in every aspect of society. So I think the country is ready for anyone to be Prime Minister as long as they have the experience and the talent to do the job.
I'm going to assume you all agree. Now it is Richard's turn. Richard Speir from London. What's your question?
Brexit is a massive distraction. If you become Prime Minister, what is the most urgent issue beyond Brexit that we need to address as a country?
Dominic Raab.
I think the opportunities for young people. I think we've told young people that the only way you can be a success in life is if you go to university. So I want to not just make sure we boost the standards in our state schools and build on the brilliant work Michael Gove did, but also create alternatives, wider choices. I'd bring back young apprenticeships for 14 to 16-year-olds, for those bright young kids who are talented, got some spark about them, but are not particularly adept at learning or don't thrive on learning just with books. I'd open up more non-graduate routes into the professions, like law. We can go further in accountancy and many others. I'd boost degree apprenticeships because I think they're a great way of getting a degree-level qualification without all of the debt of going to university. And I think we've got to try and get back to a situation where whatever your start in life, if you've got the determination, the wits about you, you can make the very best of yourself, no matter what background you come from, no matter what your start in life.
Jeremy Hunt, your top priority after Brexit?
Well, I am the entrepreneur who wants to turbocharge our economy, make it the fastest growing, most high-tech, greenest economy in Europe. And why is that? Well, I think we have a massive opportunity with the top universities in Europe, with our tech startups, our life sciences industry, to be the world's next Silicon Valley. And the reason I want to do that is because every Conservative has two desires. Number one, to cut taxes, and the other, to put more money into public services. And you can only do that if you grow the cake. And where would I prioritise the extra money for public services? Well, I've talked about my passion to abolish illiteracy. I would give one more, the social care system. My grandmother lived till she was 100 years old. I know what it's like for someone in the very last stages of their life. What an incredibly difficult period that is. Every Conservative wants to say that every single older person in our country will die with dignity and respect. And if we're honest, that does not happen at the moment, and we should be the government, we should be the party that changes that.
So your top priority for a man who was the longest-serving health secretary is not the NHS?
Well, I actually secured rather a large financial settlement for the NHS, which we need to put in place, but I also was the first person to become Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, and it's the social care bit that is unfinished business and what I want to sort out.
Michael Gove.
Children. The single most important thing we need to do is to make sure that we hand on our planet and our country in a better state to the next generation. That's why we need to tackle the climate emergency, which as Environment Secretary I've put at the heart of our politics. But we also need to recognise that for young people growing up in Britain today, there are real problems. For those growing up in poverty, those children who are at risk of abuse or children who need our help, we have a situation where they cannot receive the support they deserve, they're not adopted in the numbers that they should be, they are not given the love and care which can ensure that they can achieve later in life. It is also the case when we're thinking about the next generation that we need to ensure that they have the opportunities that all of us enjoyed. It seems to be tragic that when I think of the next generation of children, that they will leave university with debt, they will find it more difficult to have a home of their own. It seems as though their horizons are narrowing just as the world is opening up.
So you'd end tuition fees?
I think we need to look at the way in which tuition fees are levied at the moment in order to ensure that everyone who has the talent to succeed at university has the chance to do so. But more than that, it's important that people should have the chance to go to university, of course, but it's also critically important for those. It's also critically important for those who don't, that we have high-quality technical education, and more important than that, we need to recognise that because the world of work is changing, some of the jobs that we take on now will disappear in the next decade or 2 decades. So we need to make sure that people in the middle of their lives have a chance to get the skills they need in order to prosper. We must relentlessly think about tomorrow, think about the next generation, and leave a better world for our children.
Rory Stewart.
If I'm lucky enough to become the Prime Minister in 5 weeks' time, there are 10,000 things we need to do together. And I literally mean together. We need to get on with them. But the 3 things that I'm going to focus on, first of all, just to answer your question, is number 1, education. We desperately need, in particular, to prepare for the changes in work. Robotics and AI are going to eliminate a lot of jobs that we have at the moment. We need bursaries in midlife so people can get an education if they lose their job to go into a different form of work. Secondly,
well, the question was your number 1 priority. I don't want to list
and I'll get to my number 1 priority. Secondly,
no, you can get to it now because that was the question.
All right, my number 1 priority then, and I'm going to set aside infrastructure in the Northern Powerhouse. Is going to be. You see what I did there? You like that? That's good, huh? Okay. My number 1 priority, though, to be honest, is adult social care, and there I agree with Jeremy. I think it's completely disgraceful. It's a real disgrace. It's the great unfinished revolution of our society. And you feel it when I see an 88-year-old woman in my constituency looking after a 92-year-old, doubly incontinent man, changing his nappies every 2 hours through the night, and think about myself as the father of a 2-year-old, having to change the nappies and knowing that my 2-year-old is going to get out of those nappies and that I'm young and fit and she isn't. When I think of my mother, who's in hospital at the moment at the age of 83, it is that, I think, on which our civilization should be tested, and it is that I would make my central priority.
JAVID.
For me, public services. See, when I was growing up, we didn't have much, but departments like education, health, they were my lifelines. And it's one of the key reasons I can stand here today as Home Secretary, as potentially the next Prime Minister of this country. It's because of public services. Like 90% of the population of this country, I relied on public services to get me where I am now. I think I'm actually the only one on this stage that went to a comprehensive school. I went to a college, a further education college, not the type college that RORY went to. I was the first in my family to go to university. And this was what got me where I am today. And so my focus of all public services would be education, especially schools and further education colleges. I think we do need to invest a lot more. We have cut back too much in that space. And I think we need a multi-year, multi-billion-pound investment programme for schools and colleges.
I think a lot of people might be surprised you didn't say tackling knife crime.
Well, I think you're asking me my priority. If I was Prime Minister, what would be my number one priority as Prime Minister? I've answered that question. Of course, issues like serious violence remain a priority overall for the government, and that wouldn't change. But you asked me my priority as Prime Minister.
Chris, Saj is right. How do we tackle knife crime? We intervene early. We give children and young people hope. We make sure, as Jeremy pointed out, that they can read and write and that they have confidence, that they have a future. Tackling knife crime, yes, it's about tough policing, but fundamentally, it's about caring that each individual in this society matters and that we will strive from the moment they are born to give them opportunity. Our approach towards knife crime simply shouldn't be about law and order. It should be about love and hope.
And it's worth just noting that nobody has mentioned climate change as well, I suppose. As
I did.
Big priority.
I mentioned
it's
it
a big priority, the number one priority.
Christian, both Jeremy and I mentioned it as well.
Not as your number one priority.
Well, I was talking about the future for our children.
All right, thank you very much. Our next question is from Dinshaw from London. Your question.
Hello. Rory Stewart has spoken eloquently of the wisdom of humility. In that spirit, might each of the candidates describe what they suspect their greatest weakness would be were they to become Prime Minister?
Michael Gove.
Impatience. I am a man in a hurry. I want to change this country for the better. We've been discussing education earlier, and we know as a result of the work of our government that there are 1.9 million more children in good and outstanding schools. But that's not enough. I want every child to have a great start in life. And we've been talking about adult social care. And Rory spoke very movingly about the plight of those who need support at some of the most vulnerable moments in their lives. Well, I think that situation is not good enough, and we need to supercharge reform. I also believe, as we discussed earlier,
this is about your weaknesses.
We need to leave Brexit. Yes, it is.
Yes, let's talk about your weaknesses.
And it is impatience, Christian. I want to get on with the job. My view throughout my life has been, you know, I've had some chances, I've had some opportunities. I was adopted at the age of 4 months, and ever since I knew that I was adopted and my parents chose me, I have been determined to say to them, do you know what? Every minute that I spend as an adult, I will try to do something to justify your faith in me. And that is why I am impatient for change. And I'm afraid I must apologise for that.
All right, but let's be blunt about weakness, because this campaign began with an admission from you about cocaine. Isn't your weakness hypocrisy here?
No.
Not the drug taking, the hypocrisy.
No, I think I made a mistake, but I think the important thing, if you do make a mistake, and we all do, we're all frail and faulty, is that if you do make a mistake and you've fallen short of high standards, you don't lower the standards, you reflect on your mistake. And I believe it is important that all of us should try to lead lives where we try to live up to the standards we set ourselves. But if we fail or falter, then I think one of the things that we can all do is learn from our mistakes. And I learnt from my mistake, and one of the reasons why I'm in public life is in order to help people, whether it was in education or in justice, who themselves have had difficult lives and whom I wanted to help.
Let me just support Michael for one moment in this, because I think every single one of us has done something 25 years ago that we wouldn't want our mum and dad to find out about. And whatever the horrors of drugs, when we face a constitutional crisis of the magnitude of Brexit, we should not be trivialising this debate by talking about what we got up to 25 years ago.
The question was about your weakness.
I'm a restless soul, and I always want to make things better. And so I think that can be frustrating sometimes for the people around you, your friends, your family. But I think the key is with the weaknesses you have in life is try and get better at them, but also turn them into strengths. I think we should be restless to do even better for the life chances of young kids today, whether they grew up in a middle-class home or one of the toughest estates in the country. I think we should be restless to take the challenge of climate change and bring together our world-beating scientists and our world-beating entrepreneurs to come up with the green innovation of the future. I think we should be restless to have build a fairer society so that no matter what mistakes you make in life, whether it's the one that Michael has been very honest about, whether it's the lad who went inside for armed robbery that I mentored at Fight for Peace, a boxing and martial arts academy, Academy in Newham, just around the corner from here, can turn their life around. And actually, we want some restless optimism in this country. That's the way we'll get out of this terrible rut we're in. That's the way we'll get our country moving forward. And I think that's the way we'll beat Jeremy Corbyn at the next election.
And what do you say to women who fear that your weakness is that you think feminists are amongst the most obnoxious bigots in the world?
So Christian, it's easy to take something I said out of context. I was talking about the double standards that we shouldn't have in equality. And people have criticised me for that, and I understand it was said a long time ago. But judge us by what we do, not just what we say. I'm the only candidate in this leadership contest who has argued for third trimester scans as routine to stop breech births, so we reduce the number of neonatal deaths. I'm the only one that said it's crazy in 2019 that we've got pregnant agency workers who don't have a day one right to go to antenatal appointments. I'm the only one who said, given the doubling over the last 10 years of new mums being made redundant when they return to work, that we should give them that protection. And I'd ask all the candidates, forget the labels and the badge wearing about feminism, but will you back those three pledges that will actually make a difference to championing equality in 2019?
Rory Stewart?
I don't know where to start. I've got a lot of weaknesses. We've heard about where I went to school. I'm also many things I don't know about the world. And I feel that the really important lesson that I'm taking out of this campaign is a lesson about my ignorance, my frailty, about the things that I don't understand, about the fact that in this room are people smarter than me in some ways, but certainly knowing much more about the world than I do, and that actually the real thing we need to do is get out of this great leader macho posture, this idea that somehow what this country, which has never been so healthy, never been so educated, never been so wise, needs is somebody parading up and down on a stage saying, I've got all the answers, I know everything about this country, trust me. And instead, begin listening. That people in tech know more than I do about tech, that doctors know much more about medicine than I do, and that the only real wisdom in this is that we've got to change our politics away from the great me towards the we, and we've got to do this together.
Is it a weakness? Is it a weakness to change your mind, though? You know, you flip-flop around a little bit. You know, one minute you say you're minded to vote with Labour, then you vote against them. One minute you say you'd never work for Boris Johnson, then you say you'd be honoured, and then you say, oh, no, I'd never work for him again. That's weak.
I definitely change my mind. I try to think. I try to answer questions. I try to admit when I don't know stuff. And if I get something wrong, I try to admit it and change my mind. I think that's part of the business of being frail, part of the business of being a human.
SAJID, JAVID.
Well, Rory's right, because I would say that one of my challenges is sometimes being very stubborn and sticking to my opinion. And that's whether we're talking about some political opinions or even, you know, if you ask my kids, I think that that's what they'd pick as a weakness. You know, Daddy doesn't change his mind. Why won't he let me have that dog and things? It took my daughter 10 years to get Bailey as a dog. But eventually I gave in. And it shouldn't have taken that long. But I need to do better with that, because it's actually, I think it's similar to what Rory said, but for coming from the other direction. What it means is that it is, if you want to be Prime Minister, you need to be ready to listen to the experts in all the various fields, because no one knows so much about everything. And whether it is, you mentioned climate change earlier, which is one of the most important issues that we confront, whether it's dealing with the housing crisis and all these issues, you need to be able to listen.
I have to
and
be
adapt
fair
your
and
views.
challenge each of you. Isn't your weakness that you're just not a big enough figure? You weren't a big enough figure to be invited to the Trump dinner.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
That is ridiculous, Christian.
I wasn't invited.
That is ridiculous.
Let him ask. Let him answer that. It's a challenge. Let him answer it.
Well, I don't think that was the reason I wasn't invited to the dinner.
What do you think it was?
I don't know. I don't know what it was. But, look, I said earlier on this stage, I've been used to being an outsider my whole life. And so, whilst you're right, I wasn't invited to the dinner, life goes on.
Chris, they didn't invite either of us either.
Saj doesn't need
All right,
Donald
Michael,
Trump to
you've had
tell
your
him
time.
that he is a big figure.
You've had your
He's
time.
a
It's
hero.
Jeremy Hunt's.
He has come from the background he has to achieve so much. He doesn't need an American president for all of us to recognise he's an amazing guy. Thank you.
Jeremy Hunt, you haven't noted a weakness yet. You need to know something.
Yes, indeed. Well, some people say as Foreign Secretary, my biggest weakness has been to occasionally get my wife's nationality wrong. My biggest strength is that I have the most amazing and forgiving wife, and I feel very lucky about that. But my friends would say that I am someone who looks gentle but is incredibly stubborn underneath. And I don't think being stubborn is a bad thing as Prime Minister. I think we're going to need stubbornness to get the Brexit deal through. But as Health Secretary, I did have some very stubborn battles, and in particular in the battle that I had with the junior doctors. I don't think I was as good at communicating my vision as I should have been, and they are wonderful people, and that is the thing I would learn from that. Be better at communicating what you want to do.
OK, thank you. Our next question is from Anna Sterling from Horsham in West Sussex.
Thank you. How would you get rid of the postcode lottery in respect to services for people who have mental health and invisible disabilities? My son has autism and anxiety, so I'm aware of how this affects people's lives.
OK, we need to be very brief because we've used a lot of time. Jeremy Hunt, isn't this your fault?
Well, I was responsible for the health service for longer than anyone else, and mental health was one of my big priorities. And let me say now that we do not do as well as we should on mental health. And the biggest problem we face is that half of all mental health conditions become established before people are 14 years old. And if you catch mental health conditions early, you can deal with them and mean that they don't need to plague you for the rest of your life. So we have put in place a plan that will put mental health support in every school in the country to try and avoid precisely the problem that you've had with your son. And for people with autism, let us never forget that because you have a disability does not mean you won't have mental health problems. In fact, you're more likely to have those mental health problems, which is why we need an NHS that is there for you.
Dominic Raab.
I think we've got to mainstream the sensitivity, the sort of radars, if you like, to pick up the problems much earlier. That's partly about in schools, and I've seen some of those problems in my own constituency with children that come in and they just don't pick those mental health challenges up early enough. It's also making sure that we've got GP practices and wider hub of services which can do things that you don't need to go to a big hospital for. I think if we do that and we pick the issue up earlier and we're investing much more in it, actually we can tackle it. And it's one of those issues where prevention is infinitely better than cure.
SAJID JAVID.
I think, on the one hand, we have become much better as a country in identifying mental health issues and problems, especially with children, and that's great news. But we haven't matched that with the resources that are necessary. So I get far too many of my constituents still that would say my child, for example, has a special need at school and it's not being met properly. And that is why I'd said earlier that we do need to look again properly at funding of schools and colleges and education more broadly, as well as the health service, which has a big settlement. But we need to do the same thing for our schools, making sure all children are looked after, but especially those with the special educational needs.
Rory Stewart.
So mental health is clearly something that is deeply, deeply wrong in our society. I think if somebody was to come from another country and look at our society, they would pick out the way that we treat the elderly and the issues around mental health as some of the two biggest problems in our society. Now, dealing with this, I absolutely agree actually with Dom on this. One of the reasons we are actually both Conservatives is that dealing with it is feeling that compassion, recognising there's a problem, and then being very practical and energetic and realistic in dealing with that. That means working on early years, that means working on what happens in schools, that means the provision in the communities, and that means getting the resources in the right place and the kind of economy that can actually sustain those services into the future. But I think all of us around this table, whichever one of us becomes Prime Minister, and I hope it's one of us that becomes Prime Minister, must put mental health at the centre of this. And I'd like you to challenge all of us in 1 year's time on what we have done on mental health.
Michael Gove.
And I suspect that there's someone close to you, perhaps in your family, who has lived with mental ill health or perhaps is on the autistic spectrum. I know what that's like. I know people very close to me who have suffered from mental illness and indeed who are on the autistic spectrum. And one of the things that is a problem, and Jeremy has acknowledged it, is that there is a postcode lottery. It is the case that in some parts of the country we spend twice as much on mental health as we do in other areas. That's a scandal and it has to end. Because one of the things I know profoundly is that everyone has something special to offer. And sometimes when mental health impairs someone's ability to contribute, we need to be there to recognise that there is so much more that that person can achieve if we can help them through this period. And we also need to recognise that people, whether they're on the autistic spectrum or living with any other disability, have a special place in our hearts. I know, having grown up with a sister who was living with a disability, how much it matters to show love and compassion, to recognise that they're special, and to make sure that we do everything in government to give them the chance to live with dignity and to have the same choices and opportunities that all of us have.
Thank you. OK, we've heard the debate. Now it's time for the candidates to make their final pitches. Each of them will have 30 seconds to spell out why they are the best man to take over at number 10 Downing Street. We've drawn lots for the order, and first up is Michael Gove.
These are serious times. We need, as our next Prime Minister, someone who has been tested in the fire and has proven that they can deliver. At education, I transformed our schools so that more children were in good and outstanding schools than ever before. I have also, at the Department of Justice and in the environment, shown that I can bring people together, transform public services, and make our country stronger. I am ready to unite, ready to deliver, ready to lead.
Jeremy Hunt.
Our country and our party are in peril. Well, we've been arguing about a Norway Brexit or a Canada Brexit. Labour has been planning a Venezuelan or a Cuban Britain. I can be trusted because I'll be the first Prime Minister who's been an entrepreneur, the first Prime Minister who's run our NHS, the first Prime Minister to have won a marginal seat in half a century. I will deliver Brexit. I will bring our country together. I will fire up our economy and I will unlock the potential of the greatest country in the world.
Rory Stewart.
I have spent the last few weeks travelling around this country, from Londonderry to Derby, and everywhere that I have been, I have felt a sense of palpable anger of a country that feels less than the sum of its parts. Now, I began as the rank outsider in this race, 100 to 1 against me. According to my wife today, I'm now number 2 at the bookies, but I'm still an outsider. And I'm campaigning on telling the truth as I see it and never making promises that we can't deliver. And I would invite you to send me through to that final round so that we can make this great party and this great country again something founded on honesty and trust.
SAJID JAVID.
Well, tonight has shown that we have the ideas and the talent to deal with the challenges that lie ahead, especially if we all come together as a team. But if we are to beat Jeremy Corbyn, we need to reach out with our conservative values to this audience, to new audiences. We need to show that we don't just tolerate modern Britain, we embrace it, we love it. I am that person. I can do that. With my background, my experience, and my positive vision for this country, we can lead this country through Brexit and beyond.
Dominic Raab.
Well, we've all, as candidates on this stage, made the same promise in our manifesto to leave the EU. But I'm the only candidate committed to leaving by the end of October, come what may. We must keep our promises on Brexit. That's the only way we'll move on and fulfil our promise as a country and as a people. The promise of every young person to make the best of their talents. The promise of every hard-working family and couple who want to get on the housing ladder. And above all, the promise of a fairer society where everyone gets their chance to shine.
Thank you all very much. That's it for tonight's debate. I'd like to thank our audience for taking part and for their excellent questions. And of course, our thanks too to the candidates, those who joined us. The next round of voting amongst Tory MPs to narrow the field still further is Tuesday. Have a very good night.